What's up, guys? I'm Thad Barnett from the Metal Roofing Channel, and welcome to Q&A Mondays. Today, we're going to be talking about condensation and the problems that it can cause underneath your metal roof, in your attic, and in your home. And it's a very broad topic. We're going to cover as much as we can today. You might notice also that I'm not in my usual environment. Today, I'm working from home, just like so many of you around the country and around the world are. And we're going to keep rolling with this educational material every Monday and Wednesday. So subscribe and stay tuned because we have 2 months worth of material ready to go for you guys already recorded. So make sure you stay in the loop for that. Again, we're going to be talking about condensation today, and we have roofing expert Todd Miller on the episode again. He's got so much knowledge ready to share. So if you're an installer, a homeowner, a building owner, ready to learn about building science, you are in the right place. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Metal Roofing Channel. Welcome to Q&A Mondays. Today we're talking about condensation, and all the questions we're going to be discussing are in the description down below, so make sure you check that out. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. We talk about architectural metal construction every Monday and Wednesday. Well, today I have a couple very special guests, Todd Miller from Isaiah Industries and Adam Mazzella from Sheffield Metals. Thanks, guys, both for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So first of all, I think a logical step in talking about the condensation discussion is, what is condensation? Let's set a base level for our topic.
Sure. And the best way I know to describe it is to give sort of an analogy. So condensation occurs when warm, moist air hits a cool surface. So if you can imagine yourself taking that nice cold glass of lemonade on a hot summer day and you carry it from your kitchen and you go outside in your backyard. And you know that almost immediately with that warm, moist, muggy air outside, it starts to condense and form water droplets on the outside of that glass. Well, that's condensation. And a lot of times folks will have seen condensation maybe on glass or a piece of metal, and they start to think, well, there's something about metal that does that. Well, it really isn't. What really happens is it's a result of the temperature and differentiation and the moisture, and basically dew point is being hit. And so if you can imagine inside of a house, we do all kinds of things inside of our homes that create moisture. We take showers, baths, we do laundry, we do the dishes, we have house plants, we have ventless gas stoves. All of these things pump all this moisture inside of our homes. And that moisture is trying to always drive to a drier space. Well, that drier space happens to be the outside. So you've got this warm, moist air inside the house that's trying to drive to the drier space outside. And if at any point as it's trying to do that, it hits a cold surface that is cold enough, temperature differential-wise, to hit dew point, then it's going to condense. And that condensation on that glass of lemonade outside, that's great. That's relaxing. That's fun. But condensation inside your wall or roof assembly can be very dangerous. And that's what will lead to mildew and mold and rot and all kinds of problems. So the ultimate goal whenever you look at any home is, okay, what are we going to do to make sure that we don't end up with condensation?
Absolutely.
We've seen metal roofs, see them early in the morning, sun hits it, you start to see that water kind of pull up, start running down, the standing seam roof panel. That condensation's good. That condensation's okay. It's when it's trapped on the inside, what are your thoughts on how you get that moisture out of the house then? So let's say one scenario. You've got an attic in your roof assembly throughout the entire roof. We know there's houses that have vaulted and attics. So scenario A, you've got a attic. How do you get that moisture out of your attic?
Sure. And so once the moisture has gotten in the attic, and sometimes there are things that we do in construction to help keep it from getting there in the first place.
Yep.
So you want to make sure that you've got good seals around any can lights and things in your ceilings, because those, if they're not sealed well, become perfect places for that warm, moist air from the living space to end up in the attic. Some areas they'll still use vapor barriers behind the drywall and the ceilings and the wall, which is basically polyethylene. But that again helps keep that moisture from driving into your wall assemblies where it might condense. But sometimes it does end up in the attic. And so normally what you're trying to do then is you're trying to get it out of there, and you do that through ventilation. Mm-hmm. And International Building Code, of course, has requirements in terms of ventilation, and basically what that says in general in southern climates, for every 300 square feet of attic floor space, you've got to have at least 1 square foot of ventilation. And that 1 square foot of ventilation is to be half intake, where fresh air is coming in, and half exhaust, where that air is then going out, carrying the heat and the moisture with it.
And we've seen this issue with where you're saying half intake, half exhaust, where if you're only ventilating your ridge, or if you're only ventilating, your eave or your soffits, that's not going to suffice, because usually the wind is coming one direction. It doesn't mean that it's going to circulate all the way through and go in through the eave and out through the eave, or soffit, or similarly with the ridge vent.
That's good. And one of the worst things that can happen is if your ventilation actually starts to operate in reverse. So when you think about ventilation, and go back to your example of air coming in the soffits, going through the attic, exhausting out at the ridge, carrying the warm, moist air with it. Ideally, you want that to be about half intake and half exhaust. If anything, you want it to be slightly pressurized with a little bit more intake, and that helps keep the air moving and gets the airflow, the convective airflow going properly to carry that air out. Now, if you have a situation where, let's say, you've got a lot more ridge vent than you do soffit vent, you can actually start to suck air in at the ridge and then try to exhaust it out through the soffits. The bad thing about that is that drives all that moisture into your insulation on top of your ceilings. And if you start to drive moisture for, I forget what the exact number is, but as you drive moisture into your insulation, it loses its R value. So it's all becomes sort of self-defeating at that point, and you can end up with some really ugly situations if that airflow is running the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. What if I have a cathedral ceiling, vaulted ceilings, whether throughout or part of the house? How do you handle the ventilation? Or if I know I have a condensation issue, how do I address that?
Sure. And the nice thing on that is, with a lot of newer construction, we'll see that they have used vapor barriers and things to make sure that moisture can't get into the vaulted or the cathedral assembly.
But when did that start going into code, though?
That's exactly right. So we get into older homes before we were doing that. And for many years, those homes functioned fine because they had very loose windows and doors. And so that moisture was able to drive out through the walls. But now all of a sudden they've gone in, they put in nice energy efficient windows, they put house wrap on, they put siding on, done all those things to tighten up the sides of the house. And now all of a sudden they got problems up in that cathedral assembly because that warm, moist air in the house is going right up into there, and it will hit dew point at some point. And I've been in on houses before with structural insulated panels back in the early days of what we call SIPs, before they were properly sealing the joints and using vapor barriers. And that outer layer of decking was just rotting away because it was continually hitting dew point. So when you've got those extreme situations, fortunately there are answers. A lot of times it actually does involve, if there's nothing you can do inside the existing structure to create ventilation or to change what's happening, then sometimes you got to build on top of it. And you got to create new air chambers. They don't have to be real big, but you'll create new air chambers on top of the existing roof deck so that moisture can go ahead and rise up into those places, and then those are vented to get that moisture away. And you can eliminate the problem of condensation doing that.
So Todd, I may be getting into the weeds a little bit here, but let's say I'm going to put a new metal roof on, and ice and water shields are all the rage everywhere. Is there ever a situation where I shouldn't use an ice and water shield, to protect against potential condensation issues?
Sure. So a lot of times condensation is an issue of the straw that breaks the camel's back. Mm-hmm. So I'll run into houses all the time that I look at things and I'm saying, you are just on the verge of having condensation issues here, but yet what you're doing right now is working. But suddenly you do something that changes that, and it's not going to work. And that
Windows, doors, new roof.
That's a good example. The other aspect is, although we don't generally get a lot of breathability through roof assemblies, because let's face it, most roofing materials that we use don't breathe a great deal. But if you do have an extreme situation and now all of a sudden you put ice and water shield on it, you know at that point that that moisture trying to drive out of the house is trapped. So I'll often, although I agree, ice and water shields have a place, we see them used more and more. They do kind of seal a structure up like a terrarium. I don't know any other way to put it. So that moisture that is generated inside the structure trying to drive out absolutely can't get through most of those ice and water shields. I don't know of any that truly breathe. There may be a couple out there making that claim, which I would dispute. But now all of a sudden I put that on there, and now I am going to have a situation where I'm going to have condensation occurring either on or inside of the roof deck that's going to lead to problems.
Yeah. So what do you think? You attic situations, you want to make sure you vent that attic. If you've got a vaulted ceiling, you probably want to address some ventilation that's going to take moisture out of the house.
Yeah, sometimes you've got to understand better what that cathedral ceiling is really like. Some people just assume because they have a cathedral ceiling that there's no ventilation at all occurring, and oftentimes there is. Oftentimes people who built it even 50 years ago were smarter than we want to give them credit to be. So sometimes you might even do a core sample from the roof and start digging down in to find out what's really there.
Yeah.
And you might find out that there's more ventilation there than you really realize. I think one of the keys though, and everyone's starting to pay more attention to this, can lights I mentioned earlier have been very popular for a lot of years in ceilings. But they can be real sources of letting moisture from the living space into that cathedral assembly. And so making sure that those are sealed around can be hugely beneficial also. The flip side of this too is a lot of times those air leaks, that lack of ventilation, is what contributes to ice dams in the winter also. So we have this warm air that's trying to escape our house. It gets up into the attic, doesn't get properly vented out at or near the ridge, and it starts to warm the roof deck in that case because it's colder outside than it is inside. And now all of a sudden the snow starts to melt high up on the roof. That melted snow runs down, hits the cold overhangs, freezes, and we end up with icicles and ice dams and all that type of horrible stuff happening. So there again, keeping the living space air inside the living space tends to be a real key to avoiding that as well.
As this relates to metal roofing, 15, 20 years ago, there was a real big push for SRI, really keep that thermal energy outside, and really improving the energy efficiency. What we're seeing in the standing seam world, and this is probably indicative of all construction, is they're really focusing on the entire building envelope. So I think one of the things to be conscious of, or at least just be aware of, is if you are doing a renovation, and it's going to be up to code, make sure that building code kind of jives with your current construction. Make sure that you're building to not just code, but something that's going to work and not lead to additional issues.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And you always have to look at the structure on its own merit and exactly what's going to happen there. And I kind of go back again. An easy analogy in terms of condensation is think about that glass of lemonade. Yeah. Are you setting up any situations in your house realizing that you're going to generate more moist air inside your house? Are you setting up any situations where that's going to hit cold surfaces and condense? Okay. And so just a lot of it really is just a common sense approach. But absolutely, you have to know how the house was built already and what code requirements there are.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap this up, and we've learned that there's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to this topic, and there's a lot of things that can go into it, but as you said, Todd, common sense is important, and understanding what condensation means, not only for just your roof, but your entire building envelope is really important. So please comment down below if you have any questions, subscribe here to the Metal Roofing channel. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Adam. Really appreciate it. As always, I'm Thad Barnett. We'll catch you next time.